Tá, mas eu consigo assinar essa. Que hard entrou agora, que hard. Não, você tá sozinho. Não, não, ele tá falando que tá ligando. Não, porque no começo também.
Teste. Teste 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. Teste. Teste 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. Teste 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. Teste. Teste 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. Teste 1, 2. 1, 2, 3.
Seguindo com a agenda, eu quero me apresentar ao capitão de avião, Márcio Borges Ferreira, doutor.
Pois não, bom dia, comandante Márcio Borges.
Como comandante, dirigiu. Seguindo com a agenda, eu quero me apresentar ao capitão de avião, Márcio Borges Ferreira, doutor.
Pois não, bom dia, comandante Márcio Borges.
Como comandante, dirigiu. Seguindo com a agenda, eu quero me apresentar ao capitão de avião, Márcio Borges Ferreira, doutor.
Pois não, bom dia, comandante Márcio Borges.
Como comandante, dirigiu. Seguindo com a agenda, eu quero me apresentar ao capitão de avião, Márcio Borges Ferreira, doutor.
Pede. Senhoras e senhores, muito bom dia. Dentro de alguns instantes terá início o primeiro dia do workshop de segurança marítima da JID, com foco no combate à pesca ilegal, não declarada e não regulamentada. Em caso de emergência, sendo necessário evacuar a sala do Conselho de Delegados, temos 3 saídas, 2 do meu lado esquerdo e uma do meu lado direito na área das cortinas. Haverá funcionários para a secretaria nessas rotas de evacuação, que os orientarão caso necessário. A tradução simultânea será fornecida da seguinte maneira: inglês no canal 1, espanhol no canal 2 e português no canal 3. A tradução simultânea estará disponível da seguinte maneira: inglês em canal 1, espanhol canal 2, português canal 3. The simultaneous translation will be available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese for those who see us on Zoom. Além disso, durante o seminário, pedimos que desliguem ou silenciem seus telefones celulares. Todas as suas perguntas são bem-vindas e serão reguladas pelo moderador do painel. Para fazer sua pergunta, pressione o botão branco à direita dos microfones de pedestal nas mesas. Para aqueles que nos acompanham virtualmente e desejem fazer perguntas, estas devem ser direcionadas pelo chat do Zoom ou pelo e-mail maritimesecurity@jid.org e serão coordenadas pelo moderador do evento no momento apropriado. Bota o... Bom dia, senhoras e senhores, presentes no Salão do Conselho de Delegados da Junta Interamericana de Defesa, em Washington, D.C., o presidente do Conselho de Delegados, vice-almirante Alexandre Rabelo de Faria, acompanhado do diretor-geral da Secretaria, general de brigada Porfírio Fontes Velhas. A todas as autoridades presentes, panelistas e audiência, sejam bem-vindos à Junta Interamericana de Defesa. É uma honra e uma grande satisfação receber a todos aqui na Junta, no dia de hoje. Este workshop de segurança marítima, com foco no combate à pesca ilegal, não declarada e não regulamentada, tem como propósito promover o diálogo e o intercâmbio de alto nível sobre os desafios comuns na luta contra este problema, que entendemos contribuirá para melhorar a cooperação entre os países, bem como identificar como os ativos militares e não militares e os mecanismos de inteligência podem contribuir para as estratégias de aplicação da lei. Até o presente momento, contamos com a inscrição de mais de 1.300 pessoas de 36 países de todos os continentes do planeta. A todos os senhores e senhoras, muito obrigado pela participação. Gostaria de agradecer, neste momento, a empresa parceira Seguridad pelo fundamental suporte ao nosso workshop, sem o qual não poderíamos realizá-lo. Nossos sinceros agradecimentos à empresa Seguridad. Neste momento, o presidente do Conselho de Delegados da JID, vice-almirante Alexandre Rabelo de Faria, fará a abertura do nosso evento.
Bom dia a todos. Good morning, muito buenos dias. Sou o vice-almirante Rabelo, da Marinha do Brasil, presidente do Conselho de Delegados da Junta Interamericana de Defesa, que é a organização multinacional de defesa mais antiga do mundo em atividade, com 81 anos de existência. E é com grande satisfação que me dirijo a todas as senhoras e senhores hoje para fazer a abertura desse importante workshop de segurança marítima da nossa JID. Não apenas em nome da JID, mas acredito também que em nome de todo o sistema interamericano liderado pela Organização dos Estados Americanos, de quem somos uma entidade, gostaria de expressar a nossa gratidão pela presença de todos que nos acompanham presencial e virtualmente, neste evento que tem como objetivo a discussão da cooperação multilateral, abordando as várias dimensões do desafio global da pesca ilegal, não regulamentada e não declarada. Essa atividade é uma prática que tem crescido de forma alarmante no hemisfério ocidental, trazendo impactos significativos em diversos setores, ameaçando a sustentabilidade dos recursos pesqueiros da região, bem como a segurança alimentar e a economia dos países costeiros, especialmente daqueles que dependem da pesca como fonte de subsistência e renda. Além disso, essa atividade ilegal muitas vezes é associada a crimes como tráfico de drogas, tráfico de armas e tráfico de pessoas, financiando atividades criminosas que contribuem para a instabilidade e insegurança na região, tornando-se um importante e relevante desafio no âmbito da segurança marítima. A falta de regulamentação e de fiscalização adequada favorece, facilita, e por vezes até mesmo incentiva a atividade de pesca ilegal, não regulamentada e não declarada, e torna mais difícil a identificação e punição dos infratores. Esse cenário, não raro, exige esforços conjuntos e coordenados dos países afetados, o aprimoramento dos mecanismos de fiscalização e investimentos em tecnologias para monitoramento, controle e reação. Este workshop é um exemplo de uma importante iniciativa multilateral para o entendimento desse desafio comum e necessidades decorrentes e correlatas, bem como para a discussão das possibilidades de ação efetivas, visando a contribuir para a garantia da sustentabilidade dos recursos marinhos e para a segurança hemisférica. Reputo de extrema importância o estabelecimento e o treinamento dos protocolos para a atuação conjunta e coordenada das marinhas e das guardas costeiras da região, para o combate à pesca ilegal, não regulamentada e não declarada. A cooperação e a coordenação entre as forças navais são fundamentais para garantir que os esforços sejam cada vez mais efetivos. Destaco ainda a relevância da atuação colaborativa de organismos governamentais e não governamentais, nacionais e internacionais, no desenvolvimento e efetivação de políticas de combate, controle e fiscalização das águas de jurisdição de cada estado costeiro, possibilitando dessa maneira que os recursos marinhos sejam utilizados de forma sustentável e justa, evitando a exploração excessiva e prejudicial ao meio ambiente e contribuindo para a estabilidade da região. O combate à pesca ilegal, não regulamentada e não declarada é uma questão urgente e de grande alcance, que requer ações coordenadas e estruturadas. Neste sentido, o workshop, ora promovido, desempenha um papel fundamental ao promover diálogos de alto nível e trocas de conhecimentos e de boas práticas sobre os desafios comuns nas Américas. Desta forma, agradeço a participação de nossos expositores, provenientes de diversas instituições renomadas, civis e militares, bem como a parceria com a empresa Sail Drone, que apresentará como novas tecnologias de baixo custo podem agregar no combate à pesca ilegal, não regulamentada e não declarada. Relembro que o uso de tecnologias avançadas é fundamental para monitorar e fiscalizar as atividades de pesca, especialmente em áreas remotas e de difícil acesso. Por fim, não poderia deixar que este é o segundo workshop realizado no âmbito do Programa de Segurança Marítima da Junta Interamericana de Defesa, programa este denominado Safe Seas. Com esta iniciativa, acreditamos poder contribuir para o fortalecimento da cooperação e da segurança hemisférica no domínio marítimo, trazendo e difundindo valiosas informações e experiências ao sistema interamericano e, em particular, aos Estados-membros que o integram. Um agradecimento especial devo registrar aos panelistas que se apresentarão nos dias de hoje e de amanhã por emprestarem seu valioso tempo e as suas experiências aos cerca de 1.300 participantes inscritos de 36 países dos diversos continentes. Sejam por todos bem-vindos a bordo do segundo workshop de segurança marítima da Junta Interamericana de Defesa. Tenham todos um excelente dia, uma producente jornada de trabalhos e uma navegação sempre segura. Muito obrigado.
Neste momento, apresento o moderador do dia de hoje, capitão de Mar e Guerra, doutor Márcio Borges Ferreira, da Marinha do Brasil, chefe da Divisão de Pesquisas do Colégio Interamericano de Defesa. Fazer uma breve leitura do currículo do comandante Márcio Borges. O comandante Márcio Borges é PhD em Oceanografia Física, e bacharel na Escola Naval Brasileira. E atualmente é chefe da divisão de pesquisas do Colégio Interamericano de Defesa em Washington, D.C. Como comandante do navio de pesquisas hidroceanográfico Vital de Oliveira, liderou e ajudou a planejar pesquisas meteorológicas, geofísicas e oceanográficas em grandes áreas do Oceano Atlântico Sul e serviu como assessor de mentalidade marítima e espaços marinhos na Diretoria-Geral de Navegação da Marinha do Brasil. Possui larga experiência em levantamentos batimétricos e operações em rios e na Antártica. Atua nos seguintes assuntos: gerenciamento de pesquisa, Frente Brasil-Malvinas, águas modais subtropicais, circulação geral dos oceanos, perfiladores Argo, amostras de CTD, modelagem oceanográfica, pensamento estratégico e crítico, relações internacionais, assuntos marítimos e tomada de decisões estratégicas. Senhor Comandante Márcio Borges, a manobra é do senhor.
Senhoras e senhores, muito bom dia. Dando início às exposições deste primeiro dia de workshop, temos nosso primeiro painel, intitulado Economia da Pesca Ilegal e Segurança Alimentar, cujo primeiro expositor é o senhor Blaise Callaghan. O senhor Blaise Callaghan é chefe do Serviço de Desenvolvimento do Direito do Escritório Jurídico da Organização das Nações Unidas para a Agricultura e Alimentação, FAO. Ele lidera uma equipe de especialistas em desenvolvimento do direito que realiza o trabalho de assistência jurídica da FAO em alimentos e agricultura, incluindo recursos naturais. Ele é especialista em direito do mar e direito da pesca e da aquicultura e apoia os países com treinamento, capacitação e assistência técnica para aprimorar a legislação nacional de pesca, monitoramento, controle e vigilância da pesca e aplicação da lei. Prezado senhor Callaghan, a partir de agora, a plateia é sua.
Thank you very much. If I can get an indication from the interpreters that you can hear me.
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Am I being heard?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir. We can hear you, sir.
Hello?
Mr. Blaise, we can hear you. Loud and clear.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, I believe I can be heard. So I will now I will share my screen. My apologies. I'm trying to make sure that you're viewing the right screen. Display.
We can see your screen, sir.
Okay, so are you seeing the full screen rather than the presenter screen?
We are seeing the presenter screen, sir. So that's okay. We can start the presentation
Okay,
like
so
that if you wish. There is
let
no
me
problem at
see
all.
if I can hide presenter view. And let me do this again. I'm sorry. Hide presenter view. Okay, I believe you should be able to see my main screen now.
Yes, sir.
Again, my apologies, and thank you, facilitator, for introducing me. Just for our records again, my name is Blaise Kwemlangan. I'm the Chief of the Development Law Service, and I lead a team of lawyers working on development law issues, including fisheries and aquaculture in the FAO legal office. It's a pleasure to be here with in this workshop, and of course, my pleasure also to present this short presentation I'm hoping it to be. And this is about international fisheries instruments, starting, of course, from the Law of the Sea Convention, all the way to the latest treaties that deal with combating illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. So the international fisheries instruments I will present here will set the scene on the work that FAO does, especially on legal aspects and especially in terms of enforcement, where I believe many of you in your role as the Navy or the Coast Guard who are involved in fisheries enforcement, where we believe this information that we will share will be also of relevance to you in your deliberations as to how best to relate and collaborate with FAO on matters of common concern, and in this case, in how to deal with illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. So without further ado, let me start. So my presentation will cover the international fisheries instruments, both binding and non-binding. And here on, you will see a timeline of key international fisheries instruments that we in FAO use to guide us in relation to the work that we do in assisting the 196 member states of FAO, which include the countries represented in this workshop. Of course, we start with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. As you know, this is the convention that regulates all matters in the maritime space, and it includes activities from deep seabed mining to navigation to shipping to fisheries. And so this is the main treaty that is a foundation for all the other agreements and documents, instruments that we use to guide us to do the work and help countries in terms of their implementation. Then you have in 1993 the FAO Compliance Agreement. Now that's short for the agreement on the agreement to make sure compliance with international conservation and management measures by fishing vessels on the high seas. We call it the FAO Compliance Agreement for short. And then in 1995, you all may have heard about the United Nations Fish Stocks Agreement. This is also short name for the United Nations Agreement on the implementation of certain provisions of the Law of the Sea Convention relating to conservation and management of straddling fish stocks and highly migratory fish stocks. So UN Fish Stocks Agreement. In the same year, we also have a voluntary instrument. So this is a non-binding instrument. It's called the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. And this is, although it's not binding, it contains and reflects international instruments as well. And one interesting thing to note about the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries is that the FAO Compliance Agreement, the one that was done in 1993, is an integral part of the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. Then, based on the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, which is the main document that FAO uses in terms of guiding its work and work program, is based on this, we have developed 4 international plans of actions, which includes the one that is of concern to IUU fishing, called the International Plan of Action to Prevent, Deter, and Eliminate IUU Fishing. I will refer to it as the IPOA-IUU. Then after this, you have also international guidelines. So we have 9 of them, 9 international guidelines. We have 2 strategies and 33 technical guidelines, all linked to and based on the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. And then in 2009, we have the most recent binding agreement. It is the only agreement in place that deals directly with illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And that's the 2009 FAO agreement on port state measures. We will touch a little bit on this later. Just to backtrack a little bit, and please excuse me if you already know these matters, but when we talk about implementation of instruments and combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, we must always know that this is founded and it must be seen in the context of sound fisheries management, because sound fisheries management ensures the long-term conservation and sustainable use of fisheries resources, and ensuring that we maintain biological diversity and the availability of these resources for present and future generations. So, you know, it's a given, I think, for all of us, that if you leave the oceans alone and environment alone, then there is no need to be concerned. But because of human activities, including fisheries, then we have to be concerned about how we are behaving and states are behaving especially in the common spaces, to be able to ensure that the resources are maintained in a way that ensures that there is sustainability for the future. The Law of the Sea Convention talks about optimum utilization, but ensuring that we reach maximum sustainable yield. That is to allow the resources to be able, biologically speaking, to be able to propagate itself, and so ensures its survival. So that is what is, all these, in fact, maybe sound scientific, but they are all in the binding agreement called the Law of the Sea Convention, as you all know. So very quickly now to outline the fisheries management process, is just to show you where these instruments that I have referred to come in, and especially in terms of ensuring that it influences the formulations of fisheries policy and formulation of management plans, and then also leading into the formulation and adoption of fisheries regulations, laws, and then ensuring that monitoring, control, and surveillance is carried out, which is where most of you come in, and then also in terms of implementation and enforcement. So the management process allows for us to be able to take into account these binding instruments and non-binding instruments that I've referred to inject it into the fisheries management process. And so in all these areas, the instruments, as you can see from the icons, they are very important in this fisheries management process. And then also in terms of areas where we think where we need to focus on in terms of addressing IUU fishing, you can see there that in terms of illegality, you will find and should be able to address these in the area in terms of contravention of fisheries policy and the legislative framework, in terms of non-compliance with formulation management plans, in terms of regulations, non-compliance with regulations, and then also ensuring that you have implementation and enforcement. And then unreported fishing is found in specific areas, especially in the area of monitoring, control, and surveillance, and in the area of data collection and research. You remember that research is and data is very important to fisheries management as well. It informs management decisions. So that's just a basic overview of how the I and the U that is in unreported is taken into account in this management process. And then you have also the unregulated aspect, which is in relation mostly in the adoption of fisheries regulations. An example of unregulated fishing is basically the absence of regulation, or that if you have a fisheries management body that states are parties to, that they have not taken the time to ensure that the area of competence or the management decisions also put in place measures that can be followed to ensure sustainability of fisheries. So that is an example of unregulated fishing. And then this slide is just to inform you where we find the fisheries, the nature and occurrence of IUU fishing, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. We had the opening remarks that referred to the need to fight this, and this is highlighting why it is and supporting that message that we have just heard in our opening as to why we need to address illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, because it is found in all types of fisheries. It poses threat to the marine ecosystems, threatens livelihoods. It is motivated by economic gain and unscrupulous behavior, and takes advantage of corrupt administration. So that's just a snapshot of why we need to deal with IUU fishing. And then this slide is just to give you again an overview of the instruments that we have in place. So again, going back to the Law of the Sea Convention, where you have 168 parties. With the compliance agreement, you have 45 parties. In the UN Fish Stocks Agreement, you have 92 parties. And then the most latest binding agreement, the Port State Measures Agreement, you have 75 parties, the latest party being Timor-Leste. So you can see that a big group of states are involved in terms of implementation of these instruments, and most of them have provisions that are relevant for combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. So and then those that I do not have parties to, because they are non-binding instruments, are listed below here, and you have some of the pictures that represent these instruments that are in place. And these instruments address the whole range of responsibilities that states have in various capacities, as flag states, as port states, as coastal states, and as market states. So all these instruments have a bearing on these areas of responsibilities of states. And then there is also in the management framework, global management framework, and especially in terms of cooperation among states, you have regional fishery bodies. These are also called for under the Law of the Sea Convention. In terms of straddling stocks and highly migratory species, you have Article 63 and 64 of the Law of the Sea Convention that makes this cooperation relevant, and you can cooperate through directly or through regional fisheries bodies. And then also in terms of part 12 of the, I think it is part 12 of the Law of the Sea Convention, articles 116 to 119 in relation to the conservation and management of the marine environment, living marine resources, especially on the high seas. You will need also collaboration, if not directly, bilaterally, also through regional fishery bodies. And of course, just to say why all these activities that we need to do in terms of combating fisheries is important, as combating illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing is important, also because the Sustainable Development Goals set by the UN in 2015 is that you have specific targets that says that we have to effectively regulate harvest and overfishing, as well as illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, target 14.4, and then target 14.6 to ensure that certain forms of subsidies do not exist that contribute to overcapacity, overfishing, as well as illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. And you can see by the date set there by the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, that 2020 was the target date, and we have surpassed it. It just goes to show that the fight against IUU fishing never stops. It won't stop yet. And the fact that those dates have passed means that we have a lot more work to do, and we need to pursue those work in earnest. Now, just to do a very quick overview of the status of the agreement called the Port State Measures Agreement. So we have, and I haven't corrected this, we have 75 parties to the PSMA, and this includes the EU as one adhering party. I'm sorry. And the EU with its 27, I believe, member states makes up the numbers to say to indicate that there are about 101 states that are adhering to the PSMA right now. That includes the 27 members of the EU, and so it's an agreement that's enjoying a high level of ratification, accession, and adherence. And so we are hoping that that trend will continue. The parties just met in Bali 2 weeks ago, from the 8th to the 12th of May, and they had adopted a strategy for the more effective implementation of the agreement. And so we are hoping that more action will be taking place, especially using port state measures to prevent, deter, and eliminate illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. So just to give you a very quick overview of how the agreement works. So there are 4 areas, maybe 5 areas of main focus, or the measures that are listed, mentioned in the Port State Measures Agreement that are important. The first is about requesting entry into designated ports. All right. So in your world, especially, you know that of course, more often states flags vessels can enter into most ports unhindered. But because of the issue of illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, the agreement has gone back to the very right under international law, which says that states within their territories, mostly most ports occur in territories, states have the right to deny access, even deny access, and the use of their ports, even after they allow for access into their ports. So those 2 areas now I have already mentioned. One is to ensure that you request authority to enter into port, especially if you're a fishing vessel that is carrying fish that has not been landed yet. Okay, so if fish has gone through a port, it has been processed into cans and all that, we're not worried about such fish. We're worried about fish that has been taken and is for the first time going into a port. So a foreign vessel carrying fish that is for the first time destined for a port must ensure that it requests permission to enter into port. And then the port state can do two things. It can either, based on the information provided, allow the vessel to enter into port, or to deny if it believes that IUU fishing has been detected. And then there are certain activities that follow specifically after you deny entry, but we're not going to cover that at this time. We're now looking at the instance where vessels are allowed into port. So when you, even if you think that the vessel has engaged in IUU fishing, but you still want to inspect, you can allow it to enter into port. But if you do not have the capacity to carry out an inspection in port, then you have no other choice except to deny entry. But supposing you have allowed entry, then the next set of activities that the port, under the Port State Measures Agreement, is to ensure there is inspections. And inspections are carried out in according to Annex, I believe, C here of the Port State Measures Agreement, that makes sure ensures that you have to fill out the information on inspection, especially in relation to things like where is the authorization to fish, what is the IMO call sign, registration number, and so on and so forth, how much of the fish is on board. So that inspection has to take place. So that's the second lot of port state measures. The next lot of port state measures is the denial of use of port. So supposing that you upon inspection, the vessel has been detected to have or that it is confirmed that the vessel has committed illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, then the port state must deny use of port facilities for fueling, for victualling, and so on and so forth. So that's the third area of port state measures, the non-use of port services. And then the other action that needs to be taken, especially if you have established that that there has been IUU fishing, is to report if the law does not say that you can take your own laws, does not say that you can take action against the vessel that is involved in IUU fishing, then the Port State Measures Agreement says that you must report the contravention of whatever international fisheries management and conservation measure that is seen to have been in breach, or the actual act of IUU fishing, that you must report these to the flag state and other parties involved. So those are the four main areas of inspections of port state measures under the Port State Measures Agreement. And of course, there are certain exceptions, especially in relation to force majeure and distress, where still the port state measures has to take decisions, but it also must allow some exceptions to take place, and its laws will determine how that exception will be granted, where you should go in the cases of force majeure and distress. So that in a nutshell is the Port State Measures Agreement. The next animation of the slide will just show the specific areas where other, what I would call, monitoring, control, and surveillance mechanisms and tools are important, especially in the context of the PSMA, the Port State Measures Agreement. So here, in terms of detection and investigation, both at the entry and the inspection level, in terms of denial, or establishment of IUU fishing, you have to take action, which may include enforcement of national laws, especially in relation to reporting and notification. This is after you detect IUU fishing, and upon inspection, that the inspection report reflects that there is IUU fishing. And then FAO is now looking at ensuring that this information that you collect, especially in the context of the PSMA, that it will be transmitted also. And we are looking at 2 platforms for facilitating these. One is called the Global Record of Fishing Vessels. This is not an FAO initiative. It's actually an initiative of regional fishery bodies, in particular regional fisheries management organizations. And we are just wanting to establish a hub that collects all the information that's provided through the RFMOs by states to be in one place, so that you have a record of fishing vessels that is accessible. And then FAO is also ensuring that there is traceability, and one of the ways to do traceability is to ensure that there is catch documentation schemes. And then, of course, this is all part of ordinary monitoring, control, and surveillance, and that's it. So these few final slides now is just to, and which I think is useful for the workshop, is to say what we're doing in terms of capacity development and training. We have found, even if we have had fisheries laws for decades, and even if we have international fisheries instruments, starting from the Law of the Sea Convention, all the way to even before the Law of the Sea Convention, the 1958 conventions relating to Law of the Sea matters, from there up till now, even with these instruments, there continues to be incidences of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Why? Because there are gaps in the whole, I have referred to this, the fisheries management framework. And that includes policy and legislation in terms of ensuring that all actions that are down are founded in law and in policy. In terms of gaps in monitoring, control, and surveillance and operational matters, and in terms of the capacity to be able to enforce the laws, ensure policies are implemented, and ensure that the actions are taken at the appropriate levels. And so all these 3 areas that I have pointed out is now under the capacity development program that FAO has, or especially in relation to Port State Measures Agreement. And we have developed partnerships around the world with regional fishery bodies, with institutions, including at the UN level, we are collaborating with ILO, IMO, and to be able to discuss these issues and implement capacity development initiatives and programs together. But we have a specific program under the law of this, under the Port State Measures Agreement, which has delivered capacity development assistance to about 55 countries so far, in all these areas of policy and legislation, in MCS and operations, including inspections and boarding, as well as institutional setup. And the way, what I had mentioned to the good captain that had invited us to join this workshop, is that in these particular areas, we have had collaborations, for instance, with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA of the US, where they have come to help us deliver capacity building, especially in terms of inspections and enforcement procedures. Also, in terms of legislation, we have collaborated with other UN organizations like the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, with United Nations International Organization for Private International Law, with other entities as well, including the United Nations Divisions of Ocean and Law of the Sea of the Legal Affairs Unit of the United Nations. So all these opportunities that we can explore in terms of your collaboration as well. When we deliver assistance and capacity building, especially at the national level, we normally have all the agencies, especially under the Port State Measures Agreement, involve all the agencies that are relevant to port state control, port state measures. This includes it may be led by fisheries, but it includes Maritime Authority, Ports Authority, Harbor, those dealing with harbor, the Navy and police, and the Coast Guard. And so these are all areas of possible collaboration that we can deal with. We are open to being contacted. I do not have his name right now, but if you want to collaborate with us, especially under the Port State Measures Agreement Global Capacity Development Program, you can contact Dr. Matthew Camilleri, who is in charge of the global and regional processes team. I will put his name in the chat and also share his contacts with the good captain after this presentation. And so I finish now by just referring you to websites which is available, which also contains the information that I have just referred to, both on IUU fishing, on the Port State Measures Agreement itself, and on the global record. And then we have also a global, something that we have just operationalized. It's called the Global Information Exchange System, GIES, that is specifically for the PSMA in terms of sharing of the information that port states are required to share under the Port State Measures Agreement. So with that, and I'm sorry I have taken this long, and apologies for the non-putting up of the presentation quick enough earlier on, I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm pleased to answer any questions if there are any. I thank you, sir, and I hand it back to you.
Senhor Blaise, muito obrigado por sua apresentação. A seguir, teremos a apresentação do senhor William Symes, analista de políticas agrícolas da Diretoria de Comércio e Agricultura da Organização para a Cooperação e Desenvolvimento Econômico, OCDE. O senhor William Symes é especialista em biodiversidade, uso de recursos e política ambiental. Atualmente, trabalha em uma série de questões que envolvem pesca e agricultura na OCDE e nos principais países parceiros. Seu trabalho se concentra na governança da pesca em questões de sustentabilidade social, econômica e ambiental e no comércio. Reitero o compromisso da organização do evento com os horários previstos para cada uma das apresentações e vamos tentar cumprir ao máximo a programação prevista. Prezado senhor William Symes, a partir de agora, a plateia é sua.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to assume everybody can hear me okay. So I'm just going to share my screen and get started with my presentation. Brilliant. Okay, so my name is Will Symes, as the chair introduced me. I work for the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. We are an IO based in Paris, and we look predominantly at policy issues among our 39 member states, of which some are also members of the IADB. And I'd like to thank the organizers of the seminar for giving me the chance to give a talk about the economics of IUU fishing. As it's probably quite clear to the participants, I'm not a security expert, and so I won't be talking about the security aspects of IUU fishing. Instead, I kind of want to talk a little bit about why IUU fishing occurs, what the economic impacts are, and what countries can and are doing to address the issues. So the first question really is what is IUU? And the previous presentation covered this quite extensively, so I'm not going to go into it in much detail, but I just want to say it's a very broad church. It's a broad number of activities that spans the full gambit from a small-scale fisher maybe misreporting their catch to large organized operations taking advantage of maybe a lack of regulation or enforcement in certain parts of the world. And with this in mind, it's always important to consider what responses are required given the broad nature of the activities in question. So why does IUU occur? Well, quite simply, it's because it's profitable. Estimates vary on the exact size of the market for the products of IUU fishing, but they tend to be in the billions. I think here I've got 9 to 23 billion, and of course the actual size is impossible to know given the clandestine and difficult to monitor nature of IUU fishing, and we're talking millions of tons of fish a year. So because it's profitable, then it is often attractive to fishers to engage in some form of IUU. Now, excess capacity in the global fleet is also an important reason why we get IUU fishing. And what I mean by this is that even in the best managed fisheries, where the capacity to fish and catch fish exceeds the amount of fish that can be caught, you tend to see that capacity leaking out in the form of illegal fishing or IUU fishing in other areas. And this is something that's been shown with economic modeling and has been observed in real world situations. And excess capacity within the global fleet is often supported by capacity and effort enhancing government subsidies and government support, which is a point that we'll come back to later in the talk. But I just want to make that clear right now that there are certain structural issues in the way that governments support their fishing fleets that in turn can lead to IUU fishing. And finally, and something that was covered in the previous talk, is gaps in the regulation and enforcement, particularly on the high seas, of fishing can lead to IUU fishing, as unscrupulous operators can exploit legal grey areas, essentially, or places where enforcement capacity may be limited. A good example of this would be in the Southwest Atlantic, where there's no regional fisheries management organization, and therefore is potentially an area where you might see more IUU fishing than in other areas. This was a slide actually that the previous talk covered, so I'm going to go through it quite quickly, but just to reiterate that IUU fishing poses a significant challenge to global fisheries and the development of a sustainable ocean economy. Not only does IUU fishing cause net losses to the global economy and directly impact communities that rely on fisheries, potentially from a food security standpoint by redirecting fish away from local markets, but also it can complicate the challenges of fisheries managers looking to manage fisheries sustainably, because it becomes difficult for them to accurately judge the level of exploitation that is within a stock, therefore complicating the task of fisheries management. But I do want to say that actually the fight against IUU fishing is a really good example of where international cooperation and sort of development in international law that were covered in the previous presentation have been extremely successful. And actually, while IUU is still an issue, and we're talking about it today, I think it's important that we recognize that that there have been a lot of progress in this area, and that while there's still work to be done, we should be, we shouldn't be critical of existing international tools because they've worked extremely well, like the Port State Measures Agreement that Blaise was talking about. So really, I guess the next question is how has this progress has been achieved, and what are the best practices for really addressing the profitability issue, which is the underlying driver for IUU fishing. So at the OECD, we've created a number of indicators around policy best practices that look at the extent to which countries have implemented policy and legal frameworks to address IUU fishing. On there, you'll see some of the things that were mentioned in the last presentation, so the port state measures and other market measures that can be used to exclude IUU fishers from markets, thereby reducing their profitability. But we also have other best practices around sort of need for better data and information on fishing activities in order to make sure that the people who are engaged in the enforcement really know who should be allowed to fish in a certain area and who is there illegally, because without that kind of information, it's very difficult to enforce things effectively. And this kind of information and data sharing is both international, but also intragovernmental. So it's important, for example, that the fisheries authorities share the relevant information with the authorities responsible for monitoring and surveillance. So that would presumably be the Coast Guards in a lot of cases. And often we find across our countries, this doesn't happen necessarily as effectively as would be ideal. So if we look at the implementation of these policy best practices across the OECD, we find 4 areas for kind of improvement, 4 areas where more government action is needed. The first is on this use of market measures to really reduce the profitability of IUU fishing. And to give you an example, we find that 31% of the countries that responded to our IUU survey, so that's amongst our members, have no provisions to restrict imports from countries that are considered to be insufficiently active at fighting IUU fishing. An example of such measures would be the EU carding system, whereby countries are given a rating and that affects their ability to export fish to the EU. The second aspect is around the registration and authorization process for fishing. A key component of this is to really understand who the beneficial owners are of fishing vessels and fishing operations, because these are the people and entities that are really benefiting from IUU fishing. And the second aspect we find where more action is needed is on the use of unique vessel identifiers, such as IMO numbers. 24% of respondents of countries that responded to our survey did not require a UVI for fishing vessels. And this is important because UVIs are one way of preventing unscrupulous operators from renaming or reflagging vessels and moving them to a different area to avoid sanctions. Transparency is also another area for improvement. We see that the sort of publication and sharing of IUU vessel listing is rare. Only 19% of respondents reported fully publishing their IUU vessel lists. And this is important because having an accessible IUU vessel list allows other countries to also take action against the same vessels, or at least be wary of when and where there may be potential for targeted enforcement action. And finally, a better regulation of fishing-related activities. And what I mean here is that a fishing-related activity is something like at-sea transshipment or at-sea resupply of kind of staff or fuel or gear or bait. And these are the kind of activities that are really essential for supporting IUU fishing activities, but tend to be less stringently regulated than fishing itself. And of course, better regulation of fishing-related activities will again help to reduce the profit of IUU fishing activities. So next, I want to talk a little bit about what the OECD does in particular around government support and subsidies, because this really is an area where we have worked quite extensively, particularly around understanding the way government subsidized fleets can have impacts on their activity. As many of you, I'm sure, know, in 2022, the WTO agreed to binding subsidies on fisheries, binding disciplines on fisheries subsidies at the 14th Ministerial Council meeting. And under this deal, there is specifically a ban on subsidies to IUU fishing. I think it's Article 3.1 specifically bans this. And as a result, once this agreement comes into force, countries are really going to have to think more carefully about how they what actions they need to take to specifically exclude IUU fishing from subsidies. And this is not a straightforward task. For one, the establishing of a link between IUU fishing and the beneficiaries of public support is quite challenging, given the lack of data on individual beneficiaries of subsidies and the practical issues regarding the extent, measuring the extent to which a vessel would benefit from industry-wide support, such as the provision of infrastructure. The next important issue is related to this kind of broad idea of what IUU is, and that is, it's important to be able to target actors in a proportional manner. You don't want to end up criminalizing a small-scale fisher who for an administrative infraction based on their reported catch, but at the same time, you don't want to let a large-scale organized operation escape punishment under the same rules. And so understanding what systems you need in place to make these distinctions is pretty important. And finally, the differing nature of domestic regulatory and legal systems make it difficult to come up with specific mechanisms that work in all cases. So at the OECD, and I've got a couple of slides and then I'll finish up, we produced a paper that looked at the kind of policy best practices for governments looking to do this, all with the aim of reducing the profitability of IUU fishing and kind of coming up with an economic approach to addressing the issue that would be a complement to the more kind of security-focused approach that I think is going to be discussed in the rest of the workshop. And many of these things we've already discussed, but I just want to highlight a couple. One is that having authorization processes that include information on the beneficial owners and the provision of a unique vessel identifier is particularly important, as is ensuring that support is only provided to vessels that are flagged to the nation that is providing the support, given that would mean they have legal jurisdiction over the actions of their vessels, is an important one. The next one I think I want to highlight is the need for comprehensive yet flexible definitions of IUU fishing and IUU fishing related activities to be enshrined under national legislation. This is something that sounds obvious, but actually in a lot of cases, countries do not have definitions of IUU fishing in their national legislation, which can lead to sort of gray areas, particularly when you talk about enforcement in the international space. Of course, the Port State Measures Agreement that Blaise talked about is extremely important. And then the aspect of information and sharing and transparency that I've already mentioned, this kind of need to ensure that IUU fishing in one country is visible to other nations that are looking to also clamp down on the same activity to prevent illegal operations simply moving and continuing on. And finally, the one thing I wanted to highlight is that certain types of subsidies are more likely to lead to IUU fishing than others. And this includes fuel subsidies and subsidies to vessel construction and modernization and subsidized access to foreign waters. These are things that would encourage increased capacity and increased effort, and therefore are more likely to benefit IUU fishing. So simply reforming support mechanisms away from these types of policies will have an impact on the profitability of IUU fishing and aid with kind of addressing this issue. And so finally, I think that's the end of my presentation, but thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out or ask them at the end of this session. Thank you.
Senhor William Symes, muito obrigado pela forma precisa e concisa com que o senhor apresentou todos os importantes conhecimentos que o senhor ministrou nessa apresentação. Encerrando nosso primeiro painel, teremos a apresentação do senhor Lee Hardy, diretor associado da NLA International. O senhor Lee Hardy tem o compromisso de combater a ilegalidade no mar, especialmente em relação à pesca e àquilo que é prejudicial ao ambiente marinho. Ele é especialista em conscientização do domínio marítimo, com ampla experiência adquirida durante uma carreira longa na Marinha, tanto no Reino Unido quanto no exterior. Liderou um território ultramarino do Reino Unido com responsabilidade direta pela maior área marinha protegida do mundo à época. Também atuou como consultor marinho e marítimo no Foreign and Commonwealth Office e foi fundamental na designação da área de proteção marinha de Pitcairn. No momento, ele está intimamente envolvido com a economia azul, liderando recentemente o projeto Ver o Mar, da NLA International, projetado para ajudar o governo das Filipinas a combater a pesca ilegal, não declarada e não regulamentada em sua zona econômica exclusiva, utilizando sensoriamento remoto e ferramentas espaciais Prezado senhor Lee Hardy, a partir de agora, a plateia é sua.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from United Kingdom. Good morning, I suspect, to some of you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank
Loud
you.
and clear.
I'm just about to share my screen. And I hope you can now see that. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. Thank you very much for inviting me along to speak. And thank you for that introduction, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to talk to you today about situational awareness in tackling illegal fishing. I am representing NLA International. And so what I intend to do today is very quickly tell you who we are, what we do, and what we need to be doing in the future. And I think where we can, linking that into the economic aspects that we're talking about today. I'm conscious of the time we have. I have 15 slides and 15 minutes. So fasten seatbelts because we're going on a rapid journey through the slides. As I said, I am representing NLA International. Who are we? We are a blue economy solutions company. What we do is we implement ideas, we implement new technologies, we identify new technologies, and we bring together teams to solve problems in the marine space. I think it's important to say that we don't have a thing that we sell or a product we sell. We take a problem and we address that problem with what we consider to be the right solution. And of course, IUU is very much one of those problems that we are looking at. We bring in many aspects to what we're doing. We have a core team that covers pretty much every kind of skill you could hope to bring onto a team. Strategists, scientists, operators, technologists, researchers, those who are good at communicating the story of what we're doing, and specialists in individual areas. We have a number of partners. We work with governments, with academic operators and industrial partners as well. And we have pretty much a global reach at the moment. I beg your pardon. A global reach at the moment. I think it's about 30 nations that we're working in. We operate our own knowledge system known as BEX, the Blue Economy Knowledge System. It's best described as a Hoover, which is taking in huge amounts of data from across the communication systems that are out there, presenting it for us so that we are able to make decisions based on either whatever category we decide to use to shape our thinking, whether that be a country, a problem, or an ocean space, whatever it happens to be. We refine all of this knowledge, and there's something like tens of thousands of entries which we are able to search through to do our research and to understand the market that we're playing in. Those are the sort of things we do. And as I said at the opening there, a big area of activity is combating IUU. And indeed, that's one of the areas that I lead on for NLAI. What we've done is we've developed our own system, or a concept really, which we've then developed into a system. It's called Verimar. We started out with Project Verimar, and it's a maritime domain awareness tool, essentially. I think everybody here would understand that to be able to look at going out to combat IUU, you need to understand what is happening at sea, what is happening over the horizon, to have that picture and to pull that picture together to enable decision makers to make decisions. That is the marine domain awareness aspect, and we developed that to counter IUU fishing. And of course, it has applications in other areas as well. And we are looking to move that into other areas that are associated with IUU fishing that we can develop. So we developed the concept of Verimar, then developed it into an operational tool. What is it? Well, essentially, it is space-based remote sensing, taking that data, pairing it with machine learning and AI, marrying that with specialists in the field, specialist practitioners, and then producing actionable information that we can use to enable IUU to be countered. That is very much the nuts and bolts of how it works. You will understand there are a number of other aspects that will plug into that, which will make it slightly more complex, but that is at the core of what we do. We needed to take our system, our thoughts, our ideas, Verimar. We needed to then turn that into to make it work. And the area we looked at and where we partnered with was the Philippines. We linked up with the government of the Philippines, and we wanted a challenging area in which to operate and to prove the Verimar system. I think you will understand that the sea space around the Philippines is huge. There are a lot of people that are relying on the fishing and fishing related industries. They make a lot of that make their living from it. But also the nation is losing, and the figure on the slide there says $1.4 billion annually to IUU fishing. That's a startlingly accurate figure, isn't it? Let's say it's between 1 and 2 billion annually to IUU fishing. I'm conscious that in the world we operate in, we talk big numbers and big money all the time. The previous speaker was mentioning $9 to $23 billion, I think it was. We talk big numbers. So what I wanted to try and do was to try and get that into something meaningful. What did that mean in the Philippines? Well, assuming that $1 to $2 billion lost annually, if that was going into the exchequer in the countries that we're considering, that would be 61,000 new classrooms or schoolrooms, 23 new textbooks for every school-aged child, new hospitals, food for children, and new vessels to go out and combat illegal fishing. I think that really comes into context when you then look at that and say, that is every year. That is not just a one-off thing. It is every year that is being lost. So that is the problem we're trying to solve, and that is why we need to solve it. Project Verimar, I said at the very beginning, we pulled together teams to address a problem. That is what we did in the case of the Philippines example. This was the team we came up with, and people who joined us. NLA International, the people I'm working with, led this. We brought in our friends Ocean Mind. Ocean Mind are experts at remote sensing analysis, and then turning that information into usable outputs, which can assist those on the ground who are dealing with the illegal fishing problem. MDA was our data provider there, coming in from Canada. And of course, we needed to monitor and evaluate what we were doing. And so we brought in our friends from Poseidon Aquatic Resource Management. And all of this was underwritten by the UK Space Agency, providing a large element of what we were doing here through their international partnership program. So did Project Verimar work? We ran it for 18 months. We started in February 2020. We ran for 18 months, and what we achieved in that 18 months was, I think, commendable. Our evaluation and completion of the project concluded that by using Verimar, we were 1.5 to twice more cost effective than aerial surveillance for doing the same kind of task across this huge area that we were looking at, and more than 7 times more cost effective than using maritime surveillance, the traditional maritime patrol vessels out there. We were also looking at improving capability and capacity with those who would remain behind when we had finished. And so our colleagues in Ocean Mind ran a rather good training package to build capacity. In that 18 months, over 400 individuals were trained. You can see on the screen there the sort of things that were covered and the level of the training that went out. But again, 400 individuals across an 18-month period. And those individuals, of course, were surveyed at the end, and I think it was 96% of those who responded were saying that they were very impressed. They had significant or highly significant impact on their ability to detect and combat IUU fishing. So I judge that a success. Also, part of this was also making sure that we got the message out there to those who are in the IUU counter IUU world. So we ran a series of webinars, a series of training events for wider than just the groups we were working with, and we also did some research into emerging technologies and their applications in fisheries management. I just want to very quickly move on to that now at this stage. And we produced a white paper, the Emerging Technologies White Paper. This paper is available on our website. It's free. Please look at it and download it. It started out as something very small we were going to do, but it grew and it grew and it grew. It's a very comprehensive look across the technologies that are out there, or certainly starting in October 2020, that are out there looking at fisheries management. It covers those that are pretty much entrenched, pretty traditional, and it goes through to those at the other end of the spectrum, which are pretty new and really, and some of it even just concept stage. So I would commend that to you to take a look at. But of course, that was back in 2020. Things have moved on, and I think that's the key. One of the key things that I would draw our attention to in this process that we are looking through to address IUU fishing. It is forever moving. It is forever improving. We've been using those traditional MCS techniques for a while, and there are other things coming downstream at us that can be used and can assist us as we move things forward, and can address some of the problems that the previous speakers have been raising. There are a lot out there, but I just want to make you aware of two that I think can have a great impact here. The first one I wanted to mention is a concept known as SATIM. It's just a name. It doesn't mean anything. It's not an acronym or anything like that. But what it does is it builds a digital model of a vessel or a vessel type, and then by running that through AI, it compares that digital model with data being received from synthetic aperture radar, so that actually vessels can be identified quickly, speedily, and accurately. I'm just going to run through 2 or 3 quick slides here to show that to you. This picture you're looking at now is an image of the Royal Navy dockyard in Portsmouth. Those of you who are familiar with it, if you can see my cursor, the bit in the middle here is where the Royal Navy have their warships. Up here in the top of the picture is the commercial port, the civilian port. That is just the straight image. By running some SATIM across the top of it, what we did was we were able to then bowl out from that radar image where the ships were, and the green boxes highlight every ship that the system detected. And I should also say this was a real live demonstration. This is not just a simulation. This was done, and so we know those ships were there. We then took it to another level. Well, if those were ships and we had these digital models, could we take it to the next level and decide of those ships which were warships? And yes, it could. Those in blue were highlighted as being the warships. You can see the shipping in the commercial port is now no longer being shown there. I just draw your attention to this particular area here, because that's where we're going next. If we look at that picture, what we had also had a digital model of a Type 45 Daring class destroyer, and actually the system was able to detect that the Daring class destroyers were in the yellow boxes, as you see here, and the blue box was another class of warship. In fact, it was a frigate. And so I think that this is quite a revolutionary technology. Imagine this if we were to set this up to, say, build a digital model of perhaps, say, a longliner or a purseine vessel, and then run data through the satellite data through this tool. We'll be very rapidly, very quickly actually identifying those areas we needed to focus in on and address. Is it reliable? The reliability figures we were getting were between mid to high 90s for both detection and classification. So quite a good tool to be considering in that fight against IUU, and it allows us to focus very clearly on those vessels that are doing potentially the bad stuff. The final technology I just wanted to very quickly flash up is space-based maritime SIGINT. We've been working with Horizon Technologies. SIGINT is signals intelligence. Those who wear a uniform will be very familiar with it. My background is Navy, and we've been using SIGINT for a long time. I prefer to use the term RF detection, or radio frequency detection, because that is what this essentially is. Horizon Technologies are establishing their own constellation of CubeSats in order to allow maritime SIGINT to come to life commercially and be used in the fight against IUU. What does it do? Effectively, the SIGINT, or the radio frequency detection, will detect any emission from a ship at sea, a vessel at sea, a fishing vessel at sea. So whilst the fishing vessel may turn off its AIS, or indeed try and disguise its AIS, actually it is still detectable through RF detection. There are some other clever bits to it as well. It can, for example, listen into communications if it wishes to, if it's allowed to do so. There are huge difficulties around that, huge legislative difficulties, legislation difficulties, and policy difficulties as well. It's capable of doing it. Whether we want to do that, of course, is another question. So it's potentially a very, very strong tool as we look across these large areas, trying to find those who are engaged in bad stuff at sea, but actually want to try and hide themselves from us. So I think we all agree that what we want to do is stop IUU, because it is causing huge damage, not only environmentally, but also economically. How do we go about doing that? My final thoughts here, really, I think that we can turn to the NGOs and the philanthropic groups that have been out there over the last 10 to 15 years, bringing this to public awareness. They have done a really superb job in raising awareness of the catastrophe that's going on and getting it into mainstream discussion. But I think, and I'm not being cruel when I say, we've been talking about this long enough. We know what the problem is. We know it's out there, and we need to be getting on solving it. And IUU can be fixed. The technology is there, I think, as I've tried to show you, and there is new technology coming on as well, which can make it all even more efficient. There is a will to do it. From the developing the discussions that have been going on earlier, people want to make this happen and get it done. I advocate that the way to go with this is to take a commercial approach. The Coast Guards and the navies of the world, which have been taking the weight of fighting IUU so far, again, have been doing a good job, but there is so much more to be done, and they are already very, very stretched. I would suggest that what we need to do is be utilizing the commercially available solutions that I've been talking about very quickly there. Whether we use those as standalone or whether we use them in conjunction with Coast Guards and navies, we can decide. But I think a commercial approach using the commercially available solutions gives us a chance of tackling IUU on a global scale. We have to have the right people, because ultimately it's the people that make the difference in all of this. And so there are a number of people there who have the right qualifications, the right background, the right trust, the right levels of engagement, who can take this on and take it on commercially. What do we need? I think we need credible, cost-effective business cases in order that the investment can be made into these services in order to actually combat IUU as we recognize it. And of course, actually, not only will it be able to combat IUU, what it will be able to do is to champion what I call LRR, the legal, the regulated, and the reported fishing as well. Those people who are doing the right stuff can also be championed and secured in some ways, and their livelihood secured by following this kind of approach. I think, ladies and gentlemen, that is my final slide. Those are my contact details, or our website for NLA International. That is where the technology paper is. I urge you to have a look at it, and I'm delighted to take any questions or discussion afterwards. Thank you very much indeed.
Muito obrigado, senhor Lee Hardy, pelo seu esforço em tentar concentrar tantas informações importantes no tempo oferecido. O debate começará em alguns instantes. Por favor, peço que mantenham suas perguntas o mais breve e diretas o possível, a fim de facilitar a tradução das mesmas por nossa equipe de intérpretes. Inicialmente, temos uma pergunta em português a ser apresentada para o senhor Blaise Callaghan. Senhor Blaise Callaghan, nos escuta? Mr. Blaise Callaghan.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. I can hear you.
Okay, sir. I will offer this question in Portuguese. Did you hear the interpreters? Pergunta apresentada em português.
No, unfortunately, I couldn't hear the translation for Captain Marcio Borges.
Okay, sir, I will present this question in English. So, thank you so much for your presentation and the important role of the Law Development Officer of the FAO.
Translators, I'm not getting the translation from the captain.
Did you hear me, sir? In English?
Okay, so that means I have to go to the original audio because it's not coming through the English. Captain, please try again.
Did you hear me, sir?
I can hear you now.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much for your presentation and the important work of the Law Development Officer of the FAO. So I would like to ask you, sir, we know that many actions, IUU fishing actions, are acting in the high seas. So, and we know about these mainly mentioned by by Mr. William Symes during his presentation, that it's an area with no law. It's unfortunately we have few things to do in this area by a single country. So we would like to know what is the thinking of the FAO to an evolution of the UNCLOS and the evolution of the international maritime law to offer more opportunities to a better control of the trafficking beyond the national jurisdictional waters in the certain high-risk areas of each coastal state. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Captain, and I thank you for the question as well. It's a very important question. Just to put it in context, FAO is an international organization that are made up of its members. Okay, so, and the members are states. So at the end of the day, it is the members that has to assist the organization, their organization, FAO, to come up with the solutions. So that is just to paint that big picture. Now, in relation to illegal fishing and especially activities that happen on the high seas, we all know that areas beyond national jurisdiction are in areas that are not owned by anyone but belongs to everyone, and therefore in that space only the flag state, only the flag of the vessel can be able to monitor, control all the activities of that flag vessel and be able to take enforcement action against it. And if you look at the most recent case of the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, ITLOS, they seem to be making that assertion that you cannot, no other flags can take action against a vessel on the high seas in areas beyond national jurisdiction, except the flag state. So, and this is here I'm referring to the Nostar case. And unfortunately, this will be the issue. This will be the statement of international law that will be respected for some time. What have we done, even with this particular situation? Well, as I mentioned, through the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, we have come up with this agreement called the Port State Measures Agreement, right? And I have given a quick tour of the agreement itself and what the elements of it. But the thinking, the logic, the premise of the Port State Measures Agreement is that while you cannot do anything beyond national jurisdiction, and picking up on the things that were said by Will and by Lee just now, profit is the thing that drives illegal activity, especially in fisheries on the high seas. But they have, in order to make that profit, they have to land that fish somewhere. And so the Port State Measures Agreement allows for those vessels to land in port, but the port state has to take responsibility to be able to then check the vessel to ensure that it has not done any activities on the high seas that are in contravention of international conservation and management measures. So this is the way we can do it, of course, and this is because monitoring, control, and surveillance, as we have heard from our friends from OECD and Lee Hardy just now, monitoring, control, and surveillance on the high seas, even if it's not on the high seas, just within 200 miles exclusive economic zone, is a very expensive exercise. So we cannot maintain operations at sea when it's very costly. So the Port State Measures Agreement allows for that vessel to come into port and for us to exercise some control in terms of checking where the fish is coming from, whether it was caught legally, and so on and so forth, and then to take action accordingly. So that is just one way of doing it and controlling it. But of course, the technical, and to say also that FAO works with states, with governments. Those are our main clients. We don't work with private entities. And so we do work with private entities in support of governments. So our actions will be channeled through governments, asking FAO as their organization to assist them in providing support to the states itself, but mostly in terms of capacity building and regulatory frameworks and policy frameworks. We don't do the actual operations in terms of enforcement ourselves. This is the prerogative of states. I thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We really have a long path to address this trouble. So we have a question to Mr. William Symes. Did you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'd like to present this question in Spanish to guarantee the accuracy of the question. So did you hear the interpreters?
I can hear the interpreters. Yes.
Bueno, entonces en español tenemos la pregunta del señor Francisco Garay Cuesta de Ecuador, que pregunta al señor William Symes, que presentando que es interesante las propuestas, que acciones puntuales y con resultados visibles a corto plazo, el señor cree que podrían impulsar las organizaciones regionales para combatir la pesca INDR, que es la pesca IUU.
Thank you very much. Oh, there are. That's a very good question. What short-term actions can be taken in the region to combat illegal fishing? I think first, and I don't want to sound too much like I'm just going to repeat what Blaise said, I think the proper implementation of the Port State Measures Agreement, particularly as it relates to fishing-related activities as well as fisheries, as fishing itself, is an extremely important short-term action. You know, the profit motivation and closing markets to the products of IUU fishing is absolutely vital for kind of undermining the motivation behind IUU fishing. And so I would say kind of the legal frameworks like the port state measures are absolutely key. I think, and I'm going to say this without actually knowing what the status of information and data sharing in the region is, because I'm not an expert on South America. But I think the second thing would be for me to improve the kind of data and information sharing between the relevant regional fisheries management organizations and the countries of the region, and then within the countries of the region themselves is also really important for understanding and targeting specific enforcement actions towards vessels that are known to be partaking or perpetrating in illegal, unrelated or unreported fishing and related fishing support activities, fishing related activities. I think one of the things you often see is this kind of movement of vessels that have done IUU fishing from one region to the next and then kind of changing the name or reflagging, which kind of allows the sort of repeat offenses, and information sharing is a relatively low cost way of addressing that particular issue. And then of course, to just reflect on the third presentation, the integration of kind of technology is also really important for going that kind of extra step towards having kind of effective and targeted enforcement actions as well. And I'm not an expert in those particular technologies, so I'm not going to say which ones would be most appropriate, but I think the relevant authorities would have a better idea of what would be a sort of low cost and immediate action that could be taken on the technological front.
Thank you so much, sir. I'll change for my native language to my native language now and to Portuguese. Agradeço a todos pelas perguntas. Infelizmente, não temos mais tempo para as demais perguntas. As perguntas encaminhadas serão endereçadas aos palestrantes para os quais foram apresentadas. Teremos agora um período de intervalo de 10 minutos apenas e retornaremos às 10h48. Muito obrigado a todos. Dando continuidade às exposições neste workshop, iniciaremos nosso segundo painel, intitulado Cooperação e Regulamentação, tendo como primeira expositora a doutora Alexa Cole, diretora para Assuntos Internacionais, Comércio e Negócios do Escritório de Pesca da NOAA, o NOAA Fisheries. A doutora Cole lidera o trabalho do escritório para garantir o bom gerenciamento dos recursos marinhos globais. Em sua função, ela promove o engajamento e a cooperação internacional para alcançar uma administração marinha eficaz e responsável e garantir o gerenciamento sustentável da pesca em escala global. Ela tem doutorado em Direito pela Faculdade de Direito de Vermont e mestrado em Políticas Públicas Internacionais pela Universidade Johns Hopkins. Prezada doutora Cole, a partir de agora, a plateia é sua.
Thank you very much, Captain, and thank you very much for inviting me here to speak today. I was able to listen in to a few minutes of the last panel, but I haven't been able to hear your full discussion, so hopefully I won't be repeating too much of what you've already heard. As indicated, my name is Alexa Cole. I'm the Director of NOAA Fisheries Office of International Affairs, Trade, and Commerce. I was asked to talk about some examples of legislation and partnerships between navies and coast guards with our fisheries agency that have helped to contribute to mitigate illegal fishing activity. As was mentioned in the introduction, I work at NOAA, which is a broad organization that includes the U.S. Fisheries Service. And so that's our National Marine Fisheries Service is included within NOAA, and that's where I am engaged. And we work closely with the Coast Guard and some with the Navy on issues related to illegal fishing. So I know the last panel, I heard Blaise speak and I answered some questions. So I know that you did have some conversations about the Port State Measures Agreement. So I won't spend too much time talking about that, but it is certainly one of the examples that we would highlight that is a key partnership in our engagement in our efforts to combat IUU fishing. I will presume that Blaise gave you the outline of the agreement, and I don't really need to get into that. But from a domestic standpoint, in terms of a country that is implementing this agreement, as opposed to the FAO perspective, I can say it's a critical agreement in terms of how we partner with the U.S. Coast Guard. And it's one of the things that I would highlight, and you'll hear it, I think, as a theme through all of my comments, which is that the engagement between an organization like NOAA and our National Marine Fisheries Service and Coast Guard is essential to our success in this area. So the Coast Guard serves as our at-sea law enforcement arm for our fisheries work that we do. And so they are also have the captain of the port authority for vessels coming in, but they rely on NOAA and NOAA's expertise to be able to talk to them and do training with them and engage with them in terms of what are our fisheries priorities, what are the fisheries regulations that are important, what should they be looking for on board these boats. One of the ways that fish differ from some of the other things that our navies and our coast guards are responsible for enforcing is it isn't, you open a container and it isn't like a container of drugs where we know it's a problem. You open a container of fish and it could be fine, or it could be caught illegally and there is nothing on the face of the fish essentially that would let you know. And so that makes it particularly challenging. And so it's why I think in particular in this arena, having that subject matter expertise and that partnership between your fisheries authorities and your coast guards and navies is critical to success here. We work really closely with the Coast Guard It is the fisheries service, in fact, that also has done a lot of our capacity building related to the Port State Measures Agreement, trying to share our expertise and our fisheries background with other countries to be able to talk about what you really are looking for. What are some of those indicators that might make you concerned about a particular shipment? What are the discrepancies that you might see in the paperwork or the entry filings? And that's one of the areas where that partnership between the Fisheries Agency and the Coast Guard has been critical. Since I know you've talked a little bit about PSMA, I wanted to move on and spend a little bit of time talking about high seas boarding and inspection schemes. And I hope some of you are familiar with these. These are, but perhaps not all of you are. So let me give a little bit of background on them. At our regional fisheries management organization, some of them have adopted what we call high seas boarding and inspection schemes, which are a way to have a force multiplier between the membership of these organizations that help us effectively monitor, control, and enforce those international fisheries agreements that we adopt at the regional fishery management organizations. So what they do is they allow, with the agreement of the different commissions, they allow inspection vessels of members of the commission to board fishing vessels of other flag states on the high seas for the sole purpose of identifying potential violations of that RFMO's conservation and management measures. So it's limited in scope. They can only be used for that specific purpose, which is to enforce compliance with that organization's conservation and management measures. You can't use that authority to get on board the boat and look for other things. You're only looking for compliance with those measures. And it isn't that the inspecting vessel then takes action over if they find a non-compliant. That information is then sent by the inspection vessel's flag state to the flag state of the vessel with the boarding report form, so that flag state can then take investigation or in potential enforcement action if appropriate. So the inspecting country does not take any enforcement action. And then if the flag state fails to do anything with the information that was provided, then there is an opportunity within the regional fishery management organization to try and address those issues. And it has a potential to be an incredibly effective tool regionally. And so particularly where there are distant water fleets that are operating just outside of EEZs, where there isn't a lot of oversight, it is an opportunity to get a much more complete picture of what's going on in the region of the Regional Fishery Management Organization. And it's been a priority for the United States to continue to advocate for and establish these programs. We have had for a while a well-functioning program in the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission and in the North Pacific Fisheries Commission, where they have been operating. We have a limited one in the Atlantic as part of the under ICAT, which is the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas. But ICAT is looking to expand that high seas boarding and inspection scheme, and it was discussed last year and will be discussed again at the meetings this year. Canada had proposed the measure, and there was a lot of support for it and was only blocked by, I think, one member. So we are hoping to be able to find a measure this year that would be agreeable, which would then expand the scope of that high seas boarding inspection scheme across the Atlantic for the species that are covered by ICAT. So that would be a critical new expansion to that authority. Similarly, this year at our South Pacific Regional Fisheries Management Organization, which did not have a comprehensive scheme, but had a more limited scheme, this year, after 8 years of negotiations, we were actually able to adopt a comprehensive scheme that will go into effect on October 1st of this year. This was a huge success, and this was a true partnership between the Fisheries Agency, our State Department, and the U.S. Coast Guard in working to get this measure adopted. And the U.S. Coast Guard is the authority in the United States that conducts the high seas boarding and inspections. So this has been an area that has, in the South Pacific, that has been in the news for issues related to IUU fishing, some of it in the squid fishery and elsewhere. And so now we have this comprehensive high seas boarding and inspection scheme that will help us address those issues. Again, it's a way of, not every, as I think I heard Blaise say earlier, right? Not every country has the vessels, and not any country has enough vessels to be everywhere where we need to be. And so this is a way of saying, we have a vessel, it happens to be here. We don't have to just look at our own boats. We can look at all the boats that are members of this commission. And that gives us a much broader view into the compliance of those conservation and management measures. This was also one of the years we adopted an important measure for squid at SPRIFMO, South Pacific Organization. So now that measure is subject to the high seas boarding and inspection scheme. So this is a way that the measures that we get adopted sort of stack on each other so that we get a bigger and better picture of what's going on and more access to the vessels that are out there on the high seas to be able to see what's happening. Another way that you can do yet another force multiplier is through another partnership through shiprider agreements that allow officers from other countries to get on board the assets of one country. And so you can then share authorities on board that vessel. So that's another example of good partnerships. The last example I really wanted to highlight today is something that we call the Maritime Security and Fisheries Enforcement Act, which was an act that was passed in the United States in December of 2019. And it really exemplifies how complicated this issue of IUU fishing is. It was adopted in the United States, and it created an interagency working group of 21 different U.S. federal agencies to all come together to address IUU fishing. And it has proven to us, and NOAA is currently the chair of this group, that this is not anything that one agency can solve. Partnerships are critical to every success that we can have. And it is essential that we have opportunities to engage, because at least in the United States, what we see happening is all these different agencies are engaging at varying degrees on issues related to IUU fishing, but they don't all know what each other is doing. So we are wasting efforts where we might be duplicating places. We may be at sometimes contradicting each other. We might be working at cross purposes, or as opposed to working in two different countries, we're both working in the same country because we don't know that we're doing that. So this has been a really good effort to establish this big working group. It's co-chaired between NOAA, our State Department, and our Coast Guard. And so the chair rotates between those three agencies. NOAA has been the chair for the first 4-year period or 3-year period, and it will pass to the State Department and then to the Coast Guard. We have just issued a 5-year strategic plan that is the culmination of a lot of interagency engagement and review and consideration to see what are we doing across the whole U.S. government, and how can we make sure that we're working together and all, rowing in the same direction. As part of that strategic effort, we have identified priority regions around the world, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, as well as some priority countries and administrations. The priority countries and administrations were not selected based on the fact that they are the countries we have the most concern of engaging in IUU fishing. They're the countries where their waters are potentially subject to IUU fishing, or there is concern that there is inability or lack of capacity to manage some of the IUU fishing that is happening in or near their waters. And so we see these as critical partners in the effort to combat IUU fishing. And our real goal is that in working with those countries that they then become full partners in this effort, and that they come along with us for the next 5 and the next 5. So this is a way that we can continue to expand partnerships both within our government and partnerships with other governments to help take best practices, to take capacity building, to take the lessons that we've learned and the tools that we've developed and spread them around from country to country throughout the world, so that we continue to make no safe haven for IUU fishing vessels, no ports that it's safe for them to go into, no vessels that it's safe for them to transship to, no markets where their product is welcome. And the only way we can do this is through these continued collaborations. So this has been an important effort within the US government in terms of being able to do that collaboration internally to help us spread that out through our partners globally. And so those were the 3 partnerships that I really wanted to highlight to you today. And so I will stop there and let you pass it on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alexia Cole. A seguir, teremos a apresentação do Sr. Bryce Martin Castex, chefe do Escritório de Supervisão Interna e Ética da Organização Marítima Internacional, IMO. O Sr. Martin Castex tem mestrado em Direito Internacional e Direito Público e graduação em Direito Penal e Política, além de pós-graduação pela l'École nationale d'administration des affaires maritimes. Ingressou na Organização Marítima Internacional, IMO, em fevereiro de 1993 e ocupa também a posição de vice-diretor da IMO. Prezado senhor Martin Castex, a partir de agora, a plateia é sua.
Thank you very much, Captain. Should I share my screen?
Yes, sir.
So can you see it?
Yeah, we are seeing your screen.
Okay, so it's not in the PowerPoint version because it's not available right now, but I will go through it. So thank you very much to IADB to allow IMO to intervene during your maritime security workshop. In just a presentation, when I was introduced, just to mention that I'm a retired rear admiral, so I have a little bit of sympathy and knowledge of issues of navies. So my presentation is about the work of IMO. A lot has already been said. I didn't hear all the presentation, but my colleague Blaise from FAO surely has covered things. What I would like to emphasize is where does IMO fit in this discussion of today, not only about the topic, IUU fishing, the fight against IUU fishing, but also talking to navies. IMO is of course mentioned in many provisions of the United Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, and is identified as being mostly the main IMO body responsible for things in relation to maritime safety, security, and prevention of pollution, which includes fishing vessels, training of fishing vessels personnel, fishers, and of course, we cover the rights and obligations not only of flag state, but port state and coastal states. And what I find particularly relevant in today's meeting is that, as we know, in many countries belonging to IADB, the navies themselves are what we call the maritime administrations. So, of course, they have the means to go to sea, but are also covering sometimes the responsibilities as a flag state, the port state, and the coastal state. So my discussion, my talk today is even more relevant to you. So we are dealing a lot, we are cooperating a lot with navies in general. The major case is, as you recall, maybe the fight against piracy and armed robbery of Somalia. And EU put together a very important collaboration among navies And we have a lot of activities to fight against IUU. For example, we support member states, your administrations in different matters. We have a technical cooperation division, and we have a department for partnership and program. And IUU is always part and parcel when we try to help developing countries to have more means to be present and to carry out their responsibilities as flag state, port state, and coastal state. And for instance, it covers, of course, the responsibilities as flag administration to make sure that the ships flying your flag and the seafarers and fishers on board the ships are up to standard. It also addresses issues in relation to port state control. And you know that there are very important regional organizations. And the one I would like to mention, for example, is the Viña del Mar Agreement, the Caribbean MOU, or even the Paris MOU, which may involve some of your countries here, maybe not the Paris MOU. And there is also the issue of search and rescue, which is very important because this is also part of bringing a culture of safety at sea. And this is what we believe in the cooperation between FAO, ILO, and IMO, that we need to bring the safety culture in the fishing sector, which as a direct effect will fight against IUU fishing. So on the screen here, you can see the different initiatives you have. And we assume that the vessel fishing illegally is also committing other violations, and the one in particular against IMO conventions. This is why we cooperate, and I'm very pleased to hear what the previous speaker was saying, the problem to bring administration to work together at the national level. And this is one of the reasons why we established in 2000 a joint FAO ILO IMO working group, which is not at the beginning ILO was not part of it, on IUU fishing. And the idea is to bring countries together, but for each country attending, being nominated to represent either FAO or IMO, there are 13 of them. Each country should bring the people belonging to the different administration, which can be often maritime, agriculture, or defense, depending on the setup at the national level. So we we will have the fifth session later this year. And to us, IMO, the priority is really the entry into force of the Cape Town Agreement. We already have a convention on fishers, which is the STCWF for the standard of training. And the aim is the entry into force of the Cape Town Agreement. And thanks to FAO, ILO colleagues to help us doing that. And we are very close to succeed. The criteria are 22 countries, we have 20, and 3,600 fishing vessels. And I was in a meeting in Bali with colleagues from FAO for the PSMA matters, and we had very good contact with the Minister of Ecuador. And we are really counting on this country to help us fulfilling the criteria for entry into force of the Cape Town Agreement. So my presentation is available. I will not go in detail because I don't have enough time to present everything as I was intending, but definitely I will let you know that fishing is the world's most dangerous occupation. You often heard about 24,000 deaths per year, and a recent study is also talking 4 times maybe this number per year, but all fishing activities together. And we expect that the entry into force of the Cape Town Agreement, and you would help us having this implemented as flag state, port state, and coastal state in the role of the navies in your different countries, would help bringing the safety culture. We fight against pollution as well, with the issue of marine plastic and the discarding of fishing gear. And this would help a new context. So STCWF, you could be able to see it. We had several regional organizations. What is important, I would call your attention on this. If you have issues and you start thinking about becoming a party or already having deposited an instrument for the Cape Town Agreement, we are developing guidelines to help you implementing them. And this is going to be considered in July this year, the draft guidelines at the meeting of the subcommittee on implementation of IMO instruments. And you have here a submission, and thanks to the countries here contributing to the development of such guidelines. We made a Torremolinos declaration, and here is a situation where you can see where we stand with the Cape Town Agreement. So you may see those in your region and in your organization which are already parties and contracting state of the CTA, and those which are not. What is very important is that when you become a party, you declare a number of fishing vessels to help fulfilling the criteria. the fishing vessel criteria is not where the vessels are fishing, because this is not the Fishery Management Convention. We are IMO, not FAO. You just have to count the vessel which have the capability in terms of safety standard to sail beyond exclusive economic zone. So this is not the fishing vessel which go outside the EEZ, but the one who have the capabilities in terms of equipment, training of staff, and so forth. This is a big difference because you should be able to declare more ships. I'm not going to go into much detail all in the presentation. This instrument is very easy to become a party to. It only talks mainly about the new vessels, so most of your existing fleets are not going to be covered. So it's less of a concern. And if some provisions are applicable to the existing ship, you have 5 years and 10 years after the entry into force of the Cape Town Agreement to reach the proper standard. And you have plenty of opportunities to exempt your fishing vessel from, and I'm talking to you as a flag state, to exempt the fishing vessel from the provision of the Cape Town Agreement, depending on where they fish, for instance. So this is what we call the phased implementation. And you can see here where the issue of 5 years and 10 years is an additional flexibility, which should be really an encouragement for you to become a party. And I'm sure that your region can do a lot better that you have done already to increase the number of parties to the Cape Town Agreement. And why? Because when as you know, the issue of no more favorable treatment means that when the Cape Town Agreement is in force, your vessel flying your flag going in the port of countries which are parties to the Cape Town Agreement, your vessel will have to comply. Otherwise, they will be detained, because detention is the weapon of implementation of IMO instruments. So here are listed a little bit the vessels which are not covered by the Cape Town Agreement. You can see recreation, processing, and so forth. And of course, we are only talking about the big one, 24 meters and above. You will find some information about the exemption. Here, I would like to stress the advantages. It's very important to increase the safety of fishing and fishers and observers. As a coastal state, sometimes you have to put on board foreign fishing vessels which are authorized to fish in your waters, observers. And the lack of safety on board fishing vessel is a threat to them. More safety will also bring new generation, because we can see that in many countries, less and less people want to go to sea in general, but in the fishing sector in particular. And of course, as well as we want to make it a priority globally in the UN to be more attractive to women. It would protect more the marine environment. There would be inspection and survey. The difference is inspection are carried out by port state, survey by flag state. There would be port-state control, casualty investigation, and so forth. Less search and rescue, and this is something which is sometimes very, very relevant to navies, because in many parts of the world, and I'm sure in your areas as well, a lot of the intervention of navies to rescue ships are for fishing vessels and fishers. And there would be transparency in fishery, because it has to be fair. Currently, in your countries, you have ship owners of fishing vessel and fishing fleet, which are not facing a fair situation. If they comply with the standards, they have to be in competition with people practicing IU fishing, and which are cutting all corners in terms of safety and everything. So the Cape Town Agreement and implementation would make it a fair level playing field. So we have the working group. I'm not going to go into much detail. You would see that there are quite a lot of things. Everyone has to cooperate, and we see that it's not one country or one part of your responsibilities which has everything to do. The spirit of IMO is that this is shared responsibility, shared among flag state, port state, coastal state, and the navies cover some of this aspect, and some countries, they cover them all. So as you see, flag state survey is a duty under IMO convention. The port state inspection is a right. So this is a main difference. I would like to talk a little bit about what port state control does, because again, in many countries, the navies or the Navy administration, the maritime administration are fully in charge. And we have an issue, and I would like to bring to this slide. We have the issue of IGOs, intergovernmental organization. At IMO, we have 9 port-state control regime. The 10th one is the United Coast Guard, which are a standalone port-state control regime. All of them, the others, are regional. And as I said earlier, we have the Viña del Mar agreement, we have the Caribbean MOU in your regions. And what is very interesting, we currently only have one RFMO, Regional Fishery Management Organization, which is NIAFC. But we have currently a pilot project, which is about cooperation between our port state control regime. You can see the different one, which are covering all the globe and all the coastal areas, and the RFMOs or RFBs. And this pilot project we have here currently is IOTC. Here, so you have the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, which is cooperating, and this is a pilot project with the Indian Ocean MOU covering this area. And we really, really expect to have everyone involved and the navies when they are involved in all these activities to start learning about the different inspection schemes. Sometimes they cover them all, or sometimes they are being carried out by other administration. So this is a pilot project between IOMOU and IOTC. So as you know, the post-state measure agreement, as it was explained, sometimes has the opportunity to refuse access to vessels if they are found having fished illegally. On IMO instrument, the principle is more to let all ships coming in, and the sanction is, of course, the detention. And this is where we have the opportunity to make it difficult and to deter countries which are maintaining substandard fleets. So in conclusion, we have already made a regional seminar for LACA, we call the Latin America and Caribbean states, some years ago, which was really focused on the entry into force of the Cape Town Agreement. And in order to try to help you out, please do not hesitate to contact IMO. We can set up missions, either IMO on its own or in cooperation with FAO and ILO, as we do more and more. And we can send you high-level experts to help you looking into the matter, or if you are already a party, to implement the Cape Town Agreement. I crossed out signing the Torremolinos Declaration because this is no longer available. It was just at the end in 2019 where the meeting was held in Torremolinos, and you are very kindly invited and even urged to deposit an instrument of accession to build momentum for meeting the entry into force criteria of the Cape Town Agreement, which are, I repeat, 22 member states, and we have 20. Now we expect New Zealand and Korea to do something very soon. And as I said, I really, really expect Ecuador to come into the picture because they come with 153 fishing vessels. And definitely, also we had discussion with Indonesia, and Indonesia could be also a kingmaker with a very substantial fleet of 953 fishing vessels, allowing us to fulfill the criteria of 3,600 fishing vessels. So thank you very much, and happy to answer any question if you have some.
Thank you, Mr. Bryce Martin Castex. Encerrando o nosso segundo painel, teremos a apresentação do senhor Michael Stewart, que é diretor executivo da Força Tarefa Não Tripulada da Marinha dos Estados Unidos da América. Essa apresentação foi reprogramada, havia sido programada anteriormente para amanhã, mas por solicitação da própria Força Tarefa Não Tripulada da Marinha dos Estados Unidos, nós teremos essa apresentação hoje, por questões de agenda do próprio órgão. O senhor Michael Stewart atua como oficial sênior responsável na Marinha dos Estados Unidos pela identificação e aceleração de soluções de curto prazo para resolver problemas operacionais importantes por meio de recursos não tripulados, emergentes e inovadores. Prezado senhor Stewart, a partir de agora, a plateia é sua.
Hi, good morning. This is Michael Stewart. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, loud and clear.
Okay, I will speak to you for about 15 to 20 minutes about Task Force 59. I am currently the director of the Unmanned Task Force for the Chief of Naval Operations, and I am tasked with accelerating unmanned and disruptive technology to the warfighter inside 5 years. And in that way, we are working directly with fleet commanders to speed emerging technologies and cutting-edge innovation to the front as fast as we can go. Task Force 59 was something we were peripherally involved in. So I will give you a brief history of what Task Force 59 is and tell you kind of what it's doing now and then why would it matter to you. Task Force 59 was conceived firstly in NATO by a guy named Captain Michael Brasser when he was working in NATO, and he was trying to figure out how to use unmanned systems to create something he envisioned that would be called digital ocean. And the idea was, could you use unmanned sensors stitched together to provide maritime domain awareness? He was then transferred to 5th Fleet, and for us, that is in Central Command in the Arabian Gulf. And the problem that they had was that Central Command in the Arabian Gulf was no longer really the theater that the United States was mostly focused on. It was starting to look on the periphery in the Far East. We had pulled out of Iraq and we'd pulled out of Afghanistan. And while we had not forgotten about Central Command, it no longer had the assets that they used to have. So the problem was that then the fleet commander, Vice Admiral Cooper, had no assets with which to really patrol his area of responsibility. So he couldn't really tell you what was going on in the water in the Persian Gulf. He really couldn't tell you what was going on in the water in the Red Sea and what was going off in the Indian Ocean and the approaches to the Red Sea. So Captain Brasser, with Vice Admiral Cooper, conceived of an idea of using unmanned systems like sail drones and something called a MARTAC boat, and then UAVs and gliders to stitch all this together. So in June of 2021, they wrote a white paper to think about it. In July of 2021, they flew a lot of people out to Bahrain, to Manama, and I was included in that. And we designed Task Force 59. And then what happened, 2 months later, it was commissioned. A month later, we had UAVs flying. 2 months later, we had USVs, unmanned surface vehicles, in the Gulf of Aqaba. And then 6 months later, we had the largest unmanned exercise that had ever been done, maritime unmanned exercise in Manama and off the African coast. So what I want to point out to you is, firstly, how we move so quickly. Because I would imagine that most of your acquisition systems are kind of like ours. They don't move very rapidly. And so what we were experimenting with was leasing and using something called a contractor-owned, contracted-operated model, where we were essentially leasing assets. We were not buying them or acquiring them. And then operating in theater in the Persian Gulf with multiple different assets, to include USVs like a sail drone and a MARTAC boat, a UAV that was made by a company named Androl, and some other UAVs. And then we've got something called an Arabian Fox. I believe that's an L3 product. The Brits call it a Mad Fox. It's a USV. And then stitched together with mesh networks, which were radios essentially. Put in Starlink that you're seeing use Starlink to communicate, and then using AI to take all the disparate sensor data in and run algorithms. So when we were looking at a large area of multiple contacts, up to 100 contacts or more, the AI would tell us which contacts were the highest interest. So the idea is, if you're a commander that does not have a lot of manned assets, you could conceivably use these unmanned assets to have distributed sensors all over your area of responsibility. And so think about a boat with a television camera. And I would suspect that most of you, when you go home in your car, you're going to drive by traffic cameras that are going to pick up your car. So imagine if you had a series of traffic cameras floating in the water or above the water that are taking pictures of things or have you on video and forwarding all that information back through a mesh network and or Starlink. You could pass that data back, right? And so then you have a very good idea of what's going on in your area of responsibility, and you have a very clear understanding of the maritime domain awareness. And and you're not spending a lot of money to go do it. So we're seeing that the solution is potentially much cheaper, but it gives commanders that don't have a lot of manned assets an understanding of the area of responsibility. So why is that interesting to us? Well, firstly, it gives obviously the commander an area, I mean, as I said, an understanding of his AOR, but it also lets you watch things. I've noticed that people have been talking about illegal fishing. So it allows you to monitor your area of responsibility to see if there's illegal fishing or what we call malign behavior going on, or narco trafficking going on, or human smuggling, whatever is going on in the water that you might want to know about, right? The other thing that we do with Task Force 59 is we use partners and allies. So the way that was done in the Central Command, 59, the United States, also brought in the Bahrainis, the Qataris, the Saudis, the Egyptians, and to an extent the Israelis. So you start building a coalition of different countries that plug into this distributed sensor network. So when I think about Latin America, potentially, or wherever, you could have countries that, if you're thinking about Latin America, just go down the coast, Panama, Colombia, Peru, go on Chile, Bolivia, whatever, all the way down, or on the other side, Argentina, and you have the countries who could be potentially having distributed sensor network who are monitoring the water and then picking up things like illegal fishing, right? And what we're finding is, the United States is certainly interested in illegal fishing, but it's also interested in potentially tracking anybody who could be a potential adversary, right? And so it's a cooperative network where countries who are not really that worried about potential combatants are more worried about illegal fishing or any illegal activity, while we're thinking about what's going on in the water with potential combatants. So we did this in 2021. We did a lot of experimentation in Central Command, in the Gulf of Aqaba. We did in the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf, doing it in the Red Sea. Just yesterday, there was a transit of the Straits of Hormuz with unmanned USVs working in concert with manned ships who were doing maritime domain awareness and providing essentially an extended range for the manned assets to go out and poke around and look beyond where the manned asset could go. What we're doing with it now is we're going to roll this model out to what we call Fourth Fleet or Southcom, or essentially Latin America, to keep seeing if we can experiment with it and prove out the concept that you can scale it and work with partners and allies and see, stitch together, again, with what are called mesh networks, with Starlink, even more sensors, to have a larger and larger area to be able to monitor. And then obviously the other fleets, what we call Sixth Fleet, which is in the Caribbean, which is in the Mediterranean, the Baltic fleets, the fleets in the Far East, they're looking at it. And so what we're seeing is that a potential to what we would call disrupt the manned MDA model, essentially doing maritime domain awareness at a much cheaper price point and making the manned assets far more effective. Why does this matter geopolitically? So if you go back to the Central Command, there was a narrative that the United States has really pulled out of Central Command. They were not interested in the Middle East. And so for not a lot of money, certainly less than $50 million, I guess that is a lot of money, but in what typically the United States spends, for under $50 million, we had a distributed sensor network across the Fifth Fleet AOR in the Arabian Gulf that would give us information of what was going on, again, stitched together with mesh networks and running AI algorithms to make it very, very efficient. They were trying to get to a point where not only were they aware of what was going on, they were trying to use the AI to get to be predictive and what they would call have cognition, have a really clear and robust understanding of what was going on in that AOR. When people have asked us, why is this interesting to you guys? Again, it's firstly the cost, and we like to tell the story of SpaceX. Now, we're not saying this is SpaceX, but it's interesting to look what happened with SpaceX. If you take a look at what's going on is, from our perspective, NASA had gotten to a point where it was very expensive to launch satellites. very, very expensive. And eventually the United States and NASA outsourced that to the Russians. So we really had gotten out of the space launch business. If you remember, Elon Musk came in and said, I think I can go do that business a lot cheaper for 1/10 or 1/100th the price of a kilogram to get it into space. Everybody thought he was insane. And he kept trying to do it, and his rockets are blowing up, and everybody was laughing at him. And on his 8th launch, he was successful. And if you go from there to today, SpaceX is doing the majority of what we would call commodity space launch. And that business is now booming past $32 billion a year. So the commercial space market is exploding. Does that mean that NASA went out of business? Not at all. NASA is still doing very complex, very highly differentiated sorts of things that no one else can kind of do. But the stuff that a commercial industry can do it cheaper, they're doing it. And so what's the lesson for the U.S. Navy? Are we going to go lease everything? Not remotely. We still have aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, very complex combatants like destroyers and cruisers. So we're not getting out of that business because there's not a place where you can just go buy that stuff. But we are certainly looking at places where commercial industry can come in and we can have dual-use technology that could potentially come in much faster and much cheaper and essentially outsource that business like the way NASA outsourced commodity space launch. And so the Navy is pretty excited about it. And again, this is still very early, but we see that it would allow the U.S. Navy to extend its reach for not a lot of money. We're not doubling the size of the Navy to get the same effect in terms of the dollars spent. We would spend a lot less, but then still have the ability to have very, very robust maritime domain awareness and have a very good understanding of what was going on in the water. And, in a previous life, I had been a Navy pilot many, many, many years ago. And I certainly spent a lot of time flying around the Persian Gulf, the Indian Ocean, the Western Pacific, when I'd launch off an aircraft carrier. And one of the things I would be asked to do is just fly around and look at ships and then maybe take a photo of them. Very expensive model to go do that on an operating cost of an airplane that probably costs, who knows, $30,000 a flight hour. It's a much cheaper model to do it if you're doing it with something with a solar-powered USV or a solar-powered UAV and not a manned asset. So that's really the story of Task Force 59. So I would leave you with two thoughts. Firstly, how fast we went. It was really had to do with the business model changed. We didn't have to go acquire everything or purchase or buy everything. We simply leased it, and then the Navy acted sort of as the integrator with all these different systems, working them as a system of systems enabled by mesh networks, Starlink, and artificial intelligence. And so, take a look how fast we went, and then take a look at how we operationalize artificial intelligence to really help us look through a bunch of different contacts and then focus on the ones we were interested in. And then secondly, just, not only the business model, but just the use of unmanned systems. Because what we're learning now is by experimenting with smaller systems, we're really learning what is possible and what is not possible with unmanned systems. And so instead of just wondering and pondering, we're actually experimenting and figuring out how to use them. And we think it's going to help us better understand unmanned systems and better enable us to look at maritime domain awareness and better understand or enable us to look at things like illegal fishing. So that's really one of the exciting things that we're going to be working with in the Southern Command in Latin America, working with something called Giant of South and Southcom. How could you potentially use these things to track illegal fishing? And we think the answer to that is yes. So that's all I've got. That's fairly quick, but I just want to give you an overview of what Task Force 59 really is and what it's not. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Michael Stewart, for this great contribution to our workshop. Vamos começar agora o nosso segundo período de debate. Peço mais uma vez que as perguntas sejam o mais sucintas o possível para facilitar o trabalho da nossa equipe de intérpretes. As perguntas que não forem atendidas, são várias, serão enviadas posteriormente aos palestrantes, aos quais elas foram endereçadas. A primeira pergunta, endereçada à doutora Alexa Cole, será realizada em português. Did you hear me, Dr. Cole? Dr. Cole, did you hear our interpreter channel?
No, nothing came through on the English interpretation channel.
Okay, Doctor, considering the National Security Memorandum NSM 11 from United States government enacted on June 27th, 2022, it's related to the facing of IUU fishing and some travelers questions, travelers troubles. So worker troubles. Do you think this mechanism could be replied to the Latin American and Caribbean? And how is the relationship between NOAA, the NOAA fisheries, and the IMO in these questions, these working troubles and slavery, the things that are related to the IUU fishing? Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. I hope I caught all of it. I think there was a reference to our National Security Memorandum 11 about IUU fishing and the associated labor abuses. So this has been an important issue that we have been engaging on more and more with the U.S. government, which is what we hear so much about, unfortunately, is the associated labor abuses in the fishing and seafood sector. And so it is something that we've been working closely on. We have been engaging with the IMO. The presentation previously about the joint working group between the IMO, the FAO, and the ILO is one in which we have been engaged. The US government has been taking a lot of different approaches to trying to address some of these forced labor issues that are connected, even though they're not exactly the same as IUU fishing. We find them in some of the same places, and there are certainly interrelations between those two areas. It's another area where we are taking a whole of government approach. We have a number of different interagency working groups where we are trying to address this, and it is part of the work that we are doing under the Maritime Safe Act that I mentioned earlier. We do have one of the working groups under that IUU fishing working group is focused on some of these labor issues. So it's a model. I think both the National Security Memorandum and the Maritime Safe Act are models that other countries could use. They are an attempt to sort of highlight these issues in our government, recognize the political commitment to addressing them and the political imperative to addressing them, and then trying to bring together our internal coalition to work on these issues. Certainly things like labor abuses are not naturally within the fisheries service realm. So we work closely with our colleagues at the Department of Labor to try to address them, as well as with our State Department. So we do think that these are useful models where you say, this is not a problem that is simple, and it's a problem that we're going to need to bring a lot of different expertise in to work together on. So I think it has proven to be a useful model that others might want to consider. Thanks. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Doctor. So the second question is to Mr. Bryce Martin Castex. Did you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Yes, sir. I must raise this question again. This question was first presented to Mr. Cunningham from FAO. So do you think international maritime law approach on high seas must be improved to better address the IUU fishing on this area, on high seas?
Well, definitely. I mean, I would turn to what Blaise has said. But there have been a new development. You know that there have been a new instrument of the United Nations, the BBNG Convention. So this is beyond the area under the jurisdiction of the coastal state. So there is definitely more to do, but a better use of the existing provision should definitely be a major improvement in the fight against IUU fishing. And sorry to come back to the Canton Agreement, but I really think that it would make a big difference, because the ship in the middle of the ocean, they can do a lot of things. It's sometimes very difficult to locate or to identify, although we have seen that there are a lot of new technology, drones, use of satellites and everything. But at some point, the ships, the vessel need to come ashore. And with a full transparency, a full cooperation at the national level among the different services and administration involved, with a full cooperation among countries in the same region, to make sure that there are no ports which are more attractive to IUU fishing because there are less inspections, or because they are more lenient on making sure that the international standards are being put in force. A lot can be done, and as a proof of that, IMO conventions have benefited a lot from the support from port state control regime, Viña del Mar Caribbean MOU, and they have coordinated their work in a way which makes the IMO convention well implemented overall. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We have one more question to be presented to Mr. Michael Stewart. Did you hear me, sir? Mr. Michael? So we have another question. Mr. Michael unfortunately left us. So I have one more question to be presented to Dr. Cole. Did you hear me, doctor?
Yes, I can.
Yes, doctor, we have a question from Guatemala. I don't know if you hear this Spanish channel. I don't know if you have, but I can do this question in English. So
Thank you.
Dr. Veronica Chapeton from Guatemala. She's asking about her country doesn't have conditions to face the IUU fishing alone. So she are questioning about the possibility to count on the U.S. Coast Guard and U.S. Government support to face these kind of things. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I won't commit the U.S. Coast Guard since I have no authority to do so, but it is, but that goes to what I was talking about, which is trying to find and use as many force multipliers as we can. And so things like the high seas boarding and inspections are critical ways to do that. If countries don't have their own assets, other countries with assets are able to help do that work for the whole organization when we're talking about regional fishery management organizations. Another option are ship rider agreements. And I don't know off the top of my head whether there is a ship rider agreement with the United States and Guatemala, but that is the kind of thing that we can do where that's an opportunity if a country doesn't have their own assets that they can try to work with assets of other countries. So as I say, I can't speak for the Coast Guard on that, but those are the types of opportunities for countries, perhaps like Guatemala, to try to address these issues with help from other countries. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cole. I would like to present our apologies to any trouble with our translation. So, and for this moderator at the same as well. So, nós, com isso, encerramos agora o nosso primeiro dia de workshop. E eu gostaria de agradecer, em nome da Junta Interamericana de Defesa, a todos por nos acompanhar até agora e convido-os a seguir assistindo ao segundo e último dia de nosso evento amanhã, de maneira presencial, nesse mesmo auditório, no mesmo horário, ou virtualmente, por meio do mesmo link que foi utilizado hoje. Muito obrigado, tenham todos um bom dia.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.